This is based on a presentation by Dr. Richard Irwin, who's editor-in-chief of the journal Chest, and he gave me his slides and his permission to use them. So here he has misspelled peer reviewers. It should be P-E-E-R. And you should be able to prepare a manuscript, understand the peer review process, and succeed in publishing. And Chest is a very large journal, and they receive now over 4,000 manuscripts a year. Most are from outside the US and Canada, unlike the Blue Journal, in which the majority are from within America. And Chest is really concentrating most on pulmonary, critical care, and sleep. And again, it's a journal with a wide audience. So that is, you've got to make sure that your paper is attractive to a wide readership. So you have to choose a peer-reviewed journal that is most appropriate for your research, whether it's basic or clinical. Is it the correct area of specialty? And as I said before, is the readership the kind of readership that you want to read your paper? Because that is how you will be able to get advanced in your own field. And that is why, for me, I know that there is tremendous pressure on you to get a high impact factor journal to publish your paper, but to me it's more important to slowly build up a basis of people in your field, and later on you can use that to get published in higher impact factor journals. I think from the beginning you should start out slow and with very specific aims. You have to use online submission. The book that I showed you yesterday, the first chapter in it is problems with online submissions. As we all know, it can be a lot of trouble, especially uploading images. And make sure that you do all that is required of you, especially the cover letter, the abstract body of the text. And Chest wants to have basically a mini abstract in the cover letter. They want to know, in the letter to the editor-in-chief, Dr. Irwin wants to be able to know exactly what he is being given in terms of paper. Now, remember that at these journals, the pay for the editor-in-chief is quite high. And it's probably more than their university salary. And they spend a lot of time. I mean, unlike most of the journals, at least in Japan, and I think probably Korea, most of the editors-in-chief are doing this as a volunteer activity, and they don't have so much time. So all the more reason to tell the editor-in-chief, even if you're publishing in Korean, what is the main point of this paper. Just because it's not English doesn't mean to say it's not important. Especially as we did last week, we looked at when we can do acceptable secondary publication in another language. And the editors and the editorial boards and peer reviewers are dedicated to furthering in the field. But the most important thing for me is improving patient care, and that's why, like Dr. Raab has said, even if it's negative data, it's important. Dr. Abrams was saying, most editors, most reviewers are more attracted, just like you're more attracted when you read a paper and it's got positive, significant data, rather than something that did not show that, right? Then you feel that you're kind of wasting your time. But I think that in terms of patient care, it's important to also try to publish data that may not be very positive. So is the topic relevant? Is it timely? Is the endpoint significant? And if it's unique, how is it? And if it's research, how is it structured? Randomized, controlled, blinded, all three is best. There is generally bias in the North American publications to retrospective data analysis. And that can be a problem. But if you have a very important body of data that shows something that has not been shown before, that can be a reason for being accepted. And meta-analysis, well, this can be a very difficult area because sometimes it's very difficult to really compare different studies. Prospective or retrospective, they prefer prospective, randomized, control blinded. And single case studies are almost never accepted now. So did the authors select preferred paper reviewers? Now, CHEST does allow this. And it was only under Dr. Irwin that for the first time, CHEST, in its instructions to authors, stated that it welcomed suggestions of authors. And as Dr. Irwin says, even if you select a reviewer, and even if he or she is your friend, when it comes to science, they can be very strict. So just because the person knows you doesn't mean that you get a free pass. But, as I have said before, if the person knows you and knows the work you're doing, knows the problems you have, knows what you're trying to do, and basically knows that you're a good, honest scientist, then you will have at least a starting chance of getting their attention and getting a very fair review. So the editor can review himself or assign to an associate editor or associate editor assigned to peer reviewers. Now, most journals, as they get bigger and they get more manuscripts submitted, then the editor is doing less review himself, and they tend to have associate editors for the different fields. For example, asthma, sleep, tuberculosis, COPD, lung cancer. And each associate editor will then assign the paper to reviewers, because that associate editor may know more people in the field than the editor-in-chief. And have you followed the instructions to authors? So you have to make sure that you have all of these, which you've done before: the correct number of authors, conflict of interest disclosure statement, copyright release signed, IRB consent, or ethical considerations. And again, the instructions of the journal to the authors is very important. Format correct. If it's a structured abstract that is wanted, then you submit a structured abstract. The Blue Journal wants a structured abstract, as you heard Dr. Abrams say. And it has to have the correct format. And this is a checklist of things that the reviewers of CHEST go through. Is it important to clinicians? The CHEST is really not so interested in preclinical studies. Is it suitable for publication in CHEST? Is the writing acceptable? Grammar, spelling, syntax. Is the title accurate and concise? Can it be shortened? Again, the shorter the title, the more impact and the more attractive. And quite frankly, An editor-in-chief wants his journal to sell more. He wants to get more members of the society, and he wants the impact factor to go up. So again, are these points covered? Especially, is the purpose of the study clearly stated? This has to be very clearly put in the abstract and in the introduction, and usually at the beginning of the discussion. And both Dr. Raba and Dr. Abrams and, of course, Dr. Irwin say, is it clear? Is it readable? Is it easily understandable? Is it original? Sufficient detail in the materials and methods? And does the design of the study answer the research question? And this is important because if the basic design is not good, there's nothing you can do. I mean, you can improve the writing to some extent, but a basic flaw in the design is impossible. Informed consent, patient inclusion, exclusion criteria. And you have to be sure that you have covered all adverse events and dropout or fallout information. Are the statistical methods described? And as I said, you should try to keep up with statistical methods to the best of your ability. There's one very good book that I use called Reporting Statistics in Medicine by a guy called Tom Lang, who's a very nice guy and he writes very well. And he very clearly, it's not a very difficult book about statistics. It's what statistics you use for what kind of situation, which is usually what you need to know. But I would hope that at Bundang Hospital there should be an office for biostatistics or research support. The discussion and the conclusion. Again, when it says the relevant literature, you have to remember to think of who, if you submit this to CHEST, who do you think they're going to send this to as a reviewer, and put that person's papers in the references, right? And importantly nowadays, the limitations of the study explained and adequately defended. And quite frankly, sometimes the limitations of your study are quite obvious, but still you have to put in something that this study has some limitations. We had a slightly limited group of patients or something. Even if it's clear, you can restate it in the second last paragraph. And the conclusion. Do the design and results of the study justify the author's conclusions? And what are they? And what effect will the conclusions have on, especially if it's a clinical paper on clinical medicine? And both Dr. Abram and Dr. Irwin make a point of this. Do the tables and figures stand on their own? Oh, and by the way, the references, are the references accurate, current, and complete? Now, most of you are probably using EndNote, but please remember you should be careful putting in the data into EndNote, because the references are the one part of the paper that has the most mistakes. And I don't check references. I don't have time to do that. But some people do, and that's their job. I would go crazy. After 2 days, I'd probably jump out of a window. But and for the statistics in the tables and figures, are the actual numbers given as well as percentages? And are all the participants accounted for? Proper labeling. Again, in the legends, are you referring to an arrowhead that is not there, or are you not referring to an arrowhead that is there? That's also another point. Now, very often, the reviewer comes back to the editor-in-chief saying, I think a biostatistician should review this manuscript. Or was one of the authors a biostatistician? And also, I'm sure many of you have had the experience of having had a paper completely rejected, but the comments are not so bad. And you think, oh, I can answer these questions. And many times people come to me and say, look, I can answer all these questions, so can I just rewrite and send it back? Well, if the letter from the editor-in-chief says, this is a rejection, it would be better in another journal, or there are words like, it doesn't have sufficient priority, that's a sign for go away. That means rejection. And the comments are just to help you get published in another journal. So instead of wasting the journal's time by resubmitting, take the advice on board, rewrite it, and then submit it to another journal. Case reports are hardly worth talking about, but if you do, you have to say why it's unique. And if you say it's unique, you have to say that you've studied Medline from 1980 to 2013, and there was only one other case, and it wasn't exactly the same. Or you have to explain the range of your research before you can say it's the first one. And yesterday I was asked how soon should you reply back. Well, it said here Dr. Irwin is saying revise and resubmit promptly. Okay, but that usually means about 2 weeks, maximum 4 weeks. And respond to revisions point by point. Don't take criticism personally, and follow the instructions for resubmission. Again, this can be bothersome, especially electronically. Okay, most journals accept 25% or less. NEJM, BMJ accept 10%, CHEST 17%, and decreasing. And that's why you should have another journal that you can more or less rely on to give your paper a good chance. And sometimes you get a review that is bad. I mean, bad in the sense that it doesn't really, the reviewer has not understood your paper. In a case like that, you can write to the editor-in-chief and you can say, I'm sorry to trouble you, but it seems that the reviewer number 2 did not really understand what we meant, and perhaps it's partly our fault in not expressing ourselves properly, but we would appreciate it if you could perhaps refer it to one other reviewer. Because what we wanted to say is, and we have made these revisions. And sometimes, I mean, an editor-in-chief, you know, he's a human being, and if you're polite and say, I have seen reviews that you think the reviewer must have been looking at some other paper. It's just totally unrelated. Either that or he was in marijuana or something, I don't know. But I mean, just totally different. And in that case, a polite letter to the editor-in-chief generally gets results, because then the editor-in-chief will look at the review and look at your paper. Ask somebody else. And in case of acceptance, congratulations. And as Dr. Irwin says, avoid silly mistakes. Like when he became editor of CHEST, for about 2 years he was getting letters to Dear Dr. Block, who was a previous editor. So that does not make you, as he says, it doesn't get you rejected, but it won't make you any new friends. So make sure you have the cover letter, and if you're changing journals, you've been rejected by one and you're changing to another, make sure you have the right journal's name in the copyright. Suggest reviewers. Have an abstract. And the biography format incorrect, that's another point to be careful for. And for spell checking and grammar, enlist the help of somebody skilled in English. And I would say not just skilled in English, but skilled in medical editing. I mean, I'm pretty sure that probably 95% of the Korean population, just like 95% of the British population, could not try to write a medical paper given the data. It would be a mess. So, okay, they're native speakers in Britain, but their English may be fine, but that doesn't mean to say they can write a paper. And as he said, silly mistakes will not necessarily cause rejection, but they undermine the credibility of your efforts. If you make a silly mistake, people think less of you. Thank you and good luck. From Richard Owen.